Morning, sixth grade. Welcome to another chapter of history. You got done with the first civilization we talked about in chapter 4 with Mesopotamia, focusing big time on the Babylonians and the Assyrians and what happened there. Today we're going to move on to one of the most famous ancient civilizations, and that's the Egyptians. Part of the reason they're famous is the big role in the Bible, and then obviously another reason they're famous is they have landmarks that are still standing today with the pyramids, the Sphinx, their mummies, and things like that. I'm starting in the chapter opener back on page 97. We're going to talk this chapter about Egypt and then the country to the south of that, which is Kush. It says, when you think of the most powerful person in your country, who is it? Is it the president? For ancient Egyptians, one of the most powerful, important beings was the god Osiris. Osiris controlled the power of life and death. As the god of agriculture, he controlled the very food Egyptians ate. He allowed the Nile River to flood its banks and bring fertile soil and water to the Egyptian desert. Osiris also knew death. In the underworld, the souls of the dead met the god Osiris. He did not have the power to return the dead to life, but he was a symbol of ongoing life. As you read this chapter, you will learn how the forces of life and death shape the daily life of the ancient Egyptians and the Kushites. And okay, guys, we're going to learn how they're polytheistic in their religion. Turn the page, and you get the normal timeline here. So you can see what we're going to talk about. Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. As we read about that today, guys, it looks backwards to us because we would think this is upper on the map and this is lower on the map. But the reason it's this is upper in elevation. So the Nile River is flowing downhill into the Mediterranean Sea. So biblical times, guys, when you're walking everywhere, you care if we're going up in elevation or down in elevation. It's the same thing over here in biblical times. Jesus always walked from Nazareth up to Jerusalem, and it looks like he would be going down to Jerusalem, but he's going up in elevation. Once again, you have the double timeline, so you can see the things that we're going to talk about in yellow here with some of the kings, and then you can see down here some of the events that are happening in the world. So India here, but guys, this one is Mesopotamia. So one of the things we talked about last chapter now goes back and makes the thing to help us understand it. So one of the things I want to stress, guys, is I don't want you to think everything we talked about in chapter 4 happened and then stopped happening, and now Egypt starts to happen and then stops happening. These civilizations are all happening at the same time and overlapping each other. Okay, this says right here, the Egyptian Empire covered the northeastern corner of Africa. It centered on the mysterious Nile River Valley. Egypt extended from Central Africa to the coastal areas along the Red and Mediterranean Seas. Despite periods of weakness, the empire expanded over the centuries of the Middle and New Kingdoms. We'll talk about all those things, guys. You can see the mummies here in their hot, dry climate. These jars were used for the storage during the process of making mummies. The top of the jars were the heads of the Egyptian gods. This is literally where they put their organs. Not to be disgusting, but they chopped out the organs. So, interesting process of mummification. Let's get into our assignment, our lesson for today. Lesson 1, we're going to talk about the Nile River. And like normal from last chapter, it's again this chapter. How does geography influence the way people live? The Nile River was the most important factor in the development of ancient Egypt. Remember, it's one of the 4 major river civilizations that we're going to talk about to start this book. Mesopotamia is one, and we'll cover all that stuff as we get into it, guys. So let's learn about geography, then we'll understand why Egypt was so important. While empires flourished and fell in Mesopotamia, 2 other civilizations developed along the Nile River in northeastern Africa. One of these civilizations was Egypt. It developed in the northern part of the Nile River Valley. The other civilization, Kush, emerged in the far southern part of the Nile River Valley. Although Egypt and Kush were unique civilizations, they influenced one another throughout their long histories. So you have the 2 civilizations, if you're over here in your notes, Egypt and then Kush, what we'll talk about. The Nile River Valley was ideal for human settlement because of its fertile land. Once again, fill in your notes as you go. As early as 5000 BC, hunters and gatherers from the drier areas of Africa and Southwest Asia began to move into the Nile River Valley. Permanent settlements were created by early groups who farmed the land and built villages along the Nile's bank. These people were the earliest Egyptians and Kushites. The early Egyptians lived in the northern region of the Nile River Valley. They called their land Kemet, which means black land. Fill in your blanks for number 3. They called it that after its dark, rich soil. Later, this northern Nile area would be called Egypt. Of the world's early river civilizations, you probably are most familiar with ancient Egypt. People still marvel at the ruins located in present day Egypt. These ruins include the enormous stone Sphinx that has the body of a lion and a human head. Archaeologists also study the wonderful pyramids and the mummies found buried in tombs that were once full of riches. Those tombs have all been pillaged today, but obviously still very famous from movies and things like that. Okay, as you're cruising along this, guys, we'll talk about some of these things as we go through them to understand why they have the things that they do. Okay, continuing on. Many of ancient Egypt's structures survive because Egypt has a hot, dry climate. Since the region receives little rainfall, ancient Egyptians depended on the Nile for drinking and bathing. So your number 4 got filled in with drinking. The river also supplies water to grow crops. To the Egyptians, the Nile was the creator of all good. They praise it in this hymn from a primary source. You create the grain, you bring forth the barley, assuring perpetuality to the temples. If you cease your toil and your work, then all that exists is in anguish and suffering. So what they're really saying is, without the river, we're all dead. They need the water source. Do you know which is the world's longest river? It is the Nile. That flows north about 4,000 miles from Central Africa to the Mediterranean Sea. It has been called the lifeblood of Egypt. So, creator of all good, lifeblood, the ancient Egyptians knew how important this was. In your notes, guys, for number 5, you got 4,000 miles. If you want to put a note at the end, this is the longest river in the world, which is kind of important to know. At its source, the Nile is separated into 2 rivers. The first one is called the Blue Nile. Fill in your notes. And the second one is called the White Nile. Fill in your other notes. The Blue Nile begins in the snowy mountains of eastern Africa. The White Nile starts in the tropics of Central Africa. The 2 rivers join just south of Egypt and form the Nile River. There, steep cliffs and large boulders form dangerous, fast-moving waters called cataracts. Cataracts make traveling by ship along the Nile very difficult. So guys, there's a number of cataracts along here. You can see here how it says second cataract and first cataract. As they keep going down, there's more and more cataracts. Cataracts are like rapids. Like if you picture whitewater rafting, picture them going some really scary, it's not like a huge waterfall, but the combination of boulders, rapids, and waterfalls put together, that's a cataract. I can't sail my boat past those. So that's why it says traveling by ship was difficult. You'd have to get out, unload, and move around it to more peaceful river. Now, guys, that's going to be important as they start talking about this section right here, a protected land, and what came out of that because of this Nile River. Obviously, if you could sail this whole river easily, man, you could move a lot of goods and a lot of people all the way down from way down in Central Africa, all the way up here to Northern Africa, would be very powerful, but struggled with the cataracts. As with many rivers, the Nile's flow throughout the centuries has created a valley. You can see on the map on the previous page that the Nile looks like a long, winding root of a plant. Shortly before the Nile reaches the Mediterranean Sea, it splits into many branches that resemble a plant's bloom. These waterways form a fan-shaped area of fertile marshland called a delta. So that's number 7, guys. This is your delta up here. What happens is you have this water flowing down from the Nile, and it hits the Mediterranean Sea. So all this water is coming, and it smashes into a sea, which slows it down, and as it slows it down, it backs it up and floods this area. This is where Joseph took his family to live. This is the land of Goshen up here. So when Jacob and his brothers, Joseph brought his brothers and his dad there, they settled up here. Great, great land. Okay, so this is what we're after when we talk about this green area. This is where you could live in Egypt. We're going to learn what everything else around it was like. In the Nile River Valley, we see the effect that water has on the landscape. The lush green Nile Valley and delta contrast sharply with the barren deserts that stretch out on either side of the river. The change in the landscape can be so sudden that a person can stand with one foot in fertile soil and one in barren. So guys, you have your little picture of cataracts. You can't really see the cataracts here because it's still pretty smooth and there's a sailboat on it, guys. So that one's not a good picture, but this is what we just read about right here. All along the Nile, you have this plants that can grow. It's going to have fertile soil because of the deposit we'll talk about in a second, and then right next to it, just a barren desert wasteland. And so you can see how powerful it was getting close to this stuff. The Nile borders the largest desert in the world. To the west of the Nile River is the Libyan Desert, which forms part of the Sahara. The Sahara is the largest desert in the world. To the river's east lies the Eastern Desert that extends to the Red Sea. The ancient Egyptians called these deserts the Red Land because of their scorching heat. These large desert areas were not favorable to humans or animals, so they kept Egypt isolated, however, from outside invaders. Okay, so as I'm filling in my blank notes for number 9, it said this: the Nile River borders the largest desert in the world. So they called it the Libyan, and which is part of the Sahara Desert. If I go back to this map, guys, this whole thing in Africa is the Sahara Desert. Just monstrous desert and getting bigger today as we cut down the forest with it. So I have a huge desert here, and I have a huge desert here. Very difficult to do anything. So people said, I can't really walk through this, I can't really walk through this, so we're not going to attack Egypt. Now they'll talk about the differences, guys. You know that the Israelites came out of here like this. So this is your one connection from other civilizations like Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, and then into Egypt that way. Obviously you can get into Egypt by boat through the Mediterranean Sea too. But in general, it's isolated. It's cut off from other invaders, so it grew up pretty peaceful. In addition to the deserts, other physical features protected Egypt. To the far south, the Nile's dangerous cataracts that we already talked about prevented enemy ships from attacking Egypt. In the north, delta marshes stopped invaders who sailed from the Mediterranean Sea. So what they're saying is you can sail in here, but this marshland, not really easy to unload a lot of troops, guys. Now, can you sail boats? You bet. But what they're getting at, guys, is if you're an army, you want to be able to land 50 boats at the same time and have all your troops come flying off at the same time. You don't want to one at a time try to go up a river and drop your boats that way, okay? So it slows it down. It doesn't make it impossible, but it makes it difficult. These physical features gave the Egyptians advantages that Mesopotamia lacked. The Egyptians rarely faced the danger of invasion. As a result, Egypt's civilization developed peacefully. Okay, so number 10, because of the surrounding physical features, the Egyptians rarely faced the danger of invasion. The Egyptians, though isolated, were not completely cut off from other people. The Mediterranean Sea, number 11, to the north, and the Red Sea to the east provided routes for trade. And you're going to see that especially in other civilizations that are eventually going to conquer Egypt, that they just rely on the shipping more. Egypt took advantage of the region's wind patterns too, so that they could travel and trade. Although the natural flow of the Nile's currents carried boats north, winds from the north pushed sailboats south. And so what they have here, guys, is I could get a boat and I could sail this way because that's the way the river just goes by itself. So if you just picture a raft, you would float down the river into the Mediterranean Sea. The wind blows to the south though, so you could get a sailboat and blow up the river this way and get back here. So guys, travel can go both directions. That's really important because the only other way to move around besides wind energy would be human energy back in the day. In other words, try to row up this river. Well, that's not that much fun if you're doing the work. Okay, so it says this: although the natural flow of the Nile's currents carried boats north, wind from the north pushed sailboats south. So you got a little idea of the geography, guys. We got a lot more that we have to do with this lesson, but you're starting to get the idea of Egypt in general. We usually think of it as a country that's bigger today. Guys, it's just this little strip. No one's living out here. It's a desert wasteland, okay? So very prosperous along this Nile River, and we'll talk about the people that developed. That's it for today. We'll break the lesson in half. We'll finish it tomorrow, and then the assignment will come with it tomorrow.